I was standing in our living room in Austin when the courier knocked, short and impatient, like he had 3 more stops behind ours and didn't care what was inside the box he carried. I signed without thinking. It wasn't unusual. Packages had started showing up more often over the past few months. Small ones, mostly. Things she said were on sale. Things she said she'd been saving for. This one was different. It had weight to it. I set it on the coffee table and just stood there for a second, looking at it. Clean edges. Premium packaging. The kind of box you don't rush to open unless you already know what's inside. I opened it anyway. Inside was a designer bag. Dark leather, structured, untouched. I didn't need to know fashion to understand what I was looking at. I'd seen enough price tags over the years, enough careful budgeting, to recognize something that didn't fit. Years ago, I used to make less in a month than what that bag probably cost. I ran my thumb along the stitching, slow, deliberate. No receipt. No note. Just the bag, wrapped like it had arrived exactly where it was supposed to. That's when the front door opened. Megan walked in, keys in hand, mid-step like she'd been replaying something in her head on the drive home. She saw me, then the box, then the bag. She didn't ask what it was, didn't smile, didn't explain. She just froze. It was brief, maybe a second, maybe less, but it was clean. No confusion, no surprise, just a pause, like something in her mind had to adjust to a version of reality she hadn't planned for. Then it passed. Her expression settled into something neutral, almost practiced. "That came today?" she asked, setting her keys down like it didn't matter. I nodded once. "Yeah." She walked past me into the kitchen, already moving on, already somewhere else. "It was on sale," she added, not looking back. "Good timing, I guess." I didn't respond. I just stood there, hands still resting on the edge of the box, watching the space she'd just moved through. Because it wasn't the bag that stayed with me. It was that second, and that was enough. Before that box showed up, everything looked right from the outside. We had a rhythm that made sense. Not perfect, but steady. I handled operations for a mid-sized construction company. Long hours, early mornings, the kind of work where progress is measured in what gets built, not what gets said. Megan had her own routine, lighter on the surface, but organized. She kept the house running, managed details I didn't have time to think about. We were saving. That part mattered. Every month, numbers moved in the right direction. We talked about upgrading, nothing extravagant, just a better neighborhood, something quieter, more space, maybe a garage I didn't have to fight with every winter. She liked the idea of a bigger kitchen. I liked the idea of stability. We talked about it like it was already happening. And most of the time, she felt present in those conversations. She laughed easily, leaned in, asked questions that sounded like someone building towards something real. If there was distance, it was subtle enough to ignore. That's what I did. Ignored it. The first things I noticed didn't feel like problems. Just small adjustments. A new pair of shoes that didn't match any season we were in. A jacket I hadn't seen before. Nothing extreme, just slightly out of sync with how we'd been spending. When I asked, she had answers ready. Clearance. Last piece. My friend sent me the link. Always simple. Always quick. I didn't push. Her phone changed too. Not in an obvious way. She didn't hide it, not exactly. But it stayed closer to her. Screen turned slightly away. Notifications checked faster. Responses typed with a kind of focus I didn't recognize. Again, nothing you could point to. Just enough to register, not enough to confront. Evenings stayed the same on the surface. Dinner, background noise from the TV, conversations that moved but didn't go anywhere deep. She still asked about my day. I still answered. But somewhere in between, something had thinned out. Not broken, just lighter. Like a structure that still stands, but you can feel the shift in weight if you know where to look. I told myself it was normal. People change. Routines evolve. You don't question every small thing if the bigger picture holds. And it did. At least that's how it looked. We were still making plans. Still sharing space. Still moving forward, technically. Everything felt fine. That word carried a lot of weight back then. Fine meant no conflict. No raised voices. No clear problems to solve. It also meant I stopped asking questions I didn't have immediate answers to. And over time, fine became the only standard I used. Until the day it didn't hold anymore. After that box, I stopped looking for explanations. Not all at once. It wasn't a decision I sat down and made. It was quieter than that. More like something in me shifted position and locked into place. Before, when something didn't add up, I'd fill in the gaps for her. I'd take whatever answer she gave and make it work in my head. Adjust the numbers. Smooth the edges. Keep things moving. After that moment in the living room, I stopped doing that. I didn't ask about the bag again. Didn't check the brand. Didn't look up the price. I already knew enough. What mattered wasn't the object. It was the way she reacted to it. That pause. That instant where she wasn't prepared. From that point on, I paid attention differently. Her answers didn't change. If anything, they became more consistent. Too consistent. Sale. A friend helped. You're overthinking it. Same tone. Same pacing. Delivered like lines she'd used before. And maybe she had. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. I started noticing how quickly she moved past questions. Not defensive, not irritated, just efficient. Like the goal wasn't to convince me, just to close the subject. That was new. Conversations shortened. Details disappeared. If I asked where something came from, I'd get just enough information to make it sound reasonable, but nothing I could follow up on. No names. No specifics. Just conclusions. At first, I tested it. I asked about something small, a pair of shoes I hadn't seen before. She said they were discounted. I asked where. She paused, just for a fraction of a second, then named a store across town. I didn't react. A few days later, I drove past that store after work. Same hours I always kept. Same route, just extended. It was closed. Not permanently. Just that day. Could have been nothing. But it added something to the picture. That's when it stopped feeling random. Patterns don't announce themselves. They build slowly, repetition over time. Small things lining up in ways they shouldn't if everything was normal. Her timing. Her purchases. Her attention shifting in predictable ways. It all started to feel structured. Not emotional. Not impulsive. Organized. That was the part one couldn't ignore. I stopped expecting honesty. Not out of anger, just adjustment. Whatever she said, I treated it as part of something else, not the whole truth. And once you start doing that, everything sounds different. Even silence. Especially silence. By then, I wasn't trying to understand what she was doing. I was trying to see how it worked. I didn't say anything after that. No confrontation. No late-night conversations trying to work things out. I didn't sit her down or ask for clarity. That version of me, the one that needed things explained, just stopped showing up. It wasn't anger. It was absence. I still moved through the house the same way. Same schedule. Same routines. I went to work, came home, ate dinner across from her like nothing had shifted. If someone had looked in from the outside, they wouldn't have seen a difference. But internally, everything had gone quiet. I stopped reacting to her tone, her timing, her presence. When she spoke, I listened, but I didn't engage beyond what was necessary. Conversations became functional. Clean. No depth, no weight. She noticed it. Not immediately, but over time. There were moments where she'd pause, like she was waiting for something, some kind of response I used to give. A follow-up question. A reaction. I didn't give her one. And after a while, she stopped expecting it. That's when I understood something important. Most of what we had wasn't built on truth. It was built on participation. As long as I kept playing my role, the structure held. The moment I stepped out of it, even quietly, it started to shift. But I didn't push. I wasn't trying to expose anything. Not yet. I just adjusted. I stopped trying to understand her behavior. Stopped trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I was being told. That gap didn't need to be closed anymore. It just needed to be acknowledged. At some point, you realize explanations don't change outcomes. They just soften them. And I wasn't interested in softer. I didn't need her to tell me why. I didn't need context or justification or a version of events that made it easier to accept. What I needed was confirmation. Something solid. Something that didn't rely on interpretation or tone or timing. Until then, everything stayed internal. No accusations. No pressure. Just observation. And once I made that shift, something else followed. Clarity. Not emotional clarity. Not the kind that comes with closure. This was structural. I started seeing things as they were, not as I wanted them to be. The routines, the patterns, the inconsistencies, they weren't scattered anymore. They were connected. And the more I looked, the less I felt the need to say anything at all. Because talking wouldn't change what was already in motion. It would only interrupt it. Once I stopped reacting, The details became easier to see. Not because anything changed on her end, but because I wasn't filtering it anymore. I wasn't smoothing over inconsistencies or filling in gaps. I just let things sit as they were. Patterns started forming without effort. She spent more time on her phone, but it wasn't random. There were windows, specific parts of the day where her attention shifted completely. Late afternoon, around 9 p.m., sometimes early morning, before I was fully awake. Each time, the same posture. Slight turn away, screen angled just enough. Quick movements of her thumbs, then stillness, like she was waiting for something back. And when she got it, there was always a reaction. A small one. A smile she didn't share. I didn't comment on it. One evening, I walked into the bedroom earlier than usual. Not intentionally, just a change in timing. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in her hand. The second she heard me, the screen went dark. Not a natural motion. Too fast. Too precise. She looked up like nothing had happened. Hey. Hey. I said, same tone. I didn't ask what she was doing. Didn't look at the phone. I just moved past her, opened the closet, and changed like I always did. But I registered it. Everything started getting logged that way. Quietly. No reaction, just retention. A few days later, I found the second device. It wasn't hidden well. That was the first thing I noticed. Back of a drawer in the office. Under a stack of old documents we hadn't touched in years. Not locked away, not secured. Just placed somewhere I wasn't expected to look. I wasn't searching for it. I was looking for a warranty file from an old appliance. Something routine. Something that had nothing to do with her. My hand hit it by accident. Slim. Dark. Different from her regular phone. I didn't turn it on right away. I just held it for a second, feeling the weight of it. Not physically, mentally. Like everything I'd been observing had just condensed into something solid. When I powered it up, there was no hesitation. No passcode. The messages were open. A name at the top. Derek. No last name. No contact photo. Just the name, like it didn't need anything else. I didn't scroll fast. I went through it the same way I approached everything else. Steady, controlled. Messages. Photos. Short videos. Nothing dramatic. No declarations. Just consistency. Plans. Preferences. Lists of things she wanted. Specific items. Specific places. Timelines. Everything followed a pattern. Structured. Organized. Deliberate. I didn't feel anything in that moment. No anger. No shock. Just confirmation. And once you have that, everything else becomes a matter of process. Once I had confirmation, everything shifted from observation to process. There was no urgency in it. No impulse to confront her. No need to react. The emotional part had already burned out somewhere between the patterns and the proof. What was left was practical. I started with the simplest step, separation. Not physical. Not yet. Financial. I opened a new account under my name only. Same bank, different branch across town. I kept it quiet, moved small amounts at first. Nothing noticeable. Just enough to create distance without triggering questions. Then I froze the joint account. Not completely, just limited activity. Framed it as a security concern. Unusual charges, routine verification. Something that wouldn't raise suspicion but would slow everything down. She asked about it once. I kept the answer short. Bank flagged something. Temporary. She accepted it. Or at least, she didn't challenge it. That was the pattern with her. As long as things didn't interfere directly with her structure, she let them pass. I used that. Next came documentation. The messages on the second phone were only part of it. They showed intent, repetition, planning, but they weren't enough on their own. I needed context around them. Something that connected behavior to action. Receipts were the easiest place to start. I went through our shared expenses first. Transactions that didn't match our routine. Purchases outside our usual range. Deliveries I hadn't been present for. There were more than I expected. Same categories. Same price brackets. Items that aligned with what I'd seen in the messages. Specific brands. Specific requests. I started matching dates. Messages on one side. Transactions on the other. They lined up. Not perfectly, but close enough to remove doubt. Then I found the transfers. Small amounts at first. Then larger ones. Moved into an account I didn't recognize. Not joint. Not personal. Hidden. That was the part that confirmed this wasn't just personal. It was structured beyond that. I didn't interrupt it. Didn't block it. Didn't expose it. I let it continue while I recorded everything. Dates. Amounts. Frequency. Each piece added weight. After that, I contacted a lawyer. Dallas. Not local. I didn't want overlap. Didn't want shared networks or familiar names. I needed distance, objectivity, someone who saw this as a case, not a situation. The consultation was short. I laid out what I had: messages, financial records, patterns. He didn't react emotionally, just asked for clarification where it mattered. Ownership, access, timeline. By the end of the call, everything had a direction. It wasn't about what she did anymore. It was about what could be proven and how it would be handled. From that point on, I wasn't part of the relationship. I was managing its end. I didn't plan the confrontation the way most people would expect. There was no setup, no timing it for impact, no rehearsed lines. By the time I said anything, the outcome was already decided. The conversation wasn't meant to change anything. It was just the final step in making it visible. It happened in the kitchen, late evening. Nothing unusual about the timing. She was standing by the counter, scrolling through her phone, same posture I'd seen 100 times before. I walked in, set my keys down, and looked at her. She glanced up, casual. Hey. I didn't respond to that. I just said one name. Derek. That was it. No accusation. No context. Just the name. Her reaction was immediate. Color drained from her face. Not slowly, not subtly. It was like something underneath had been pulled out all at once. Her hand tightened around the phone, and for a second, she didn't move. Then she started talking. Fast. Too fast. What are you talking about? She said, but the words didn't match the tone. I don't. Who? Why would you? She couldn't settle on a direction. That was the difference between truth and reaction. Truth is consistent. Reaction tries to find footing. I didn't interrupt her. I let her run through it. Different versions, overlapping explanations. Fragments that didn't connect. Each one trying to replace the last before it had time to collapse. Then I reached into my jacket and placed the screenshots on the counter. Printed. Clean. Arranged. Messages. Transfers. Dates. I didn't slide them toward her. I just set them down between us. She stopped. Completely. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was empty. Like everything she had prepared to say no longer applied. She looked at the pages, but didn't pick them up. Didn't need to. Her eyes moved across them quickly, recognizing patterns she already knew existed. That's when it shifted. The pace dropped. Her voice changed. I can explain, she said, quieter now. Controlled. I didn't respond. There was nothing to explain. She stepped closer, reached out, touched my hand. A familiar gesture. Automatic. Something she'd done 1,000 times before, in different contexts, for different reasons. This time, it didn't register. I didn't pull away, but I didn't react either. No tension. No acknowledgement. Just stillness. That was when she understood. Not the situation. That part she already knew. She understood that the conversation wasn't open. There was no space left to negotiate, no version of events that would shift anything back. I didn't mean for it to, she started again. I cut it off, not by raising my voice, but by stepping back, creating distance. Physical, clear, final. The conversation ended there. Not because we reached a conclusion, but because there was nothing left to process. Everything that mattered had already been established. The rest was just noise. After that, everything moved without me. There were no more conversations. No attempts to revisit what happened, no follow-ups, no emotional aftermath played out in the house. We existed in the same space for a short period, but it was transitional, functional. She tried, once or twice, to reopen it. Small attempts. Can we talk? I think we should sit down. I didn't engage. Not out of spite. Just consistency. The decision had already been made. Repeating the conversation wouldn't change the structure of what followed. The legal process picked up quickly. Papers were filed through the attorney in Dallas. Clean, direct, no unnecessary extensions. Everything was based on documentation, financial records, transaction history, the transfers I had tracked. That was the part she hadn't accounted for. The hidden accounts surfaced early. It wasn't difficult once the pattern was established. Transfers from joint funds, routed in intervals that avoided attention, but consistent enough to map over time. When it was presented formally, it wasn't framed as suspicion. It was presented as fact. Her response changed after that. The confidence she carried during the confrontation didn't carry over into the process. There were delays on her side at first, requests for time, attempts to restructure the narrative, to shift focus back to personal aspects. It didn't hold. Because it wasn't being handled personally anymore. It was procedural. Assets were evaluated. Shared property identified. Purchases made during the marriage were included, regardless of origin. That included the gifts. The bag was listed, along with everything else. High-value items, documented through receipts and delivery records. Not speculation. Not assumptions. Verified. I insisted everything be sold. Not out of principle, just alignment. If it was acquired within the structure of the marriage, it was part of the division. No exceptions based on how or why it was obtained. That part hit harder than anything I said. Not emotionally, structurally, because it disrupted the system she had built. The separation of accounts, the hidden flow of money, the parallel structure she maintained. It all relied on remaining outside of view. Once it was brought into the process, it lost that protection. By the time everything was finalized, the numbers didn't favor her the way she expected. Not drastically, but enough. Enough to shift outcomes. Enough to change what she walked away with. We didn't argue through it. Didn't negotiate back and forth. Each step was handled through representation, documentation, and timelines that didn't bend. And once it started moving, it didn't stop. There was no pause for reflection. No moment where it slowed down and gave space for anything else. It just continued, until there was nothing left to process. When it was over, there wasn't a moment that marked it. No final conversation. No exchange that felt like closure. Just a point where the process ended and there was nothing left to sign, nothing left to divide, nothing left to track. I didn't feel like I had won. That wasn't the outcome. If anything, it felt like stepping out of something that had already ended long before the paperwork caught up to it. The legal side just gave it structure. Defined the edges. What I thought was a life, what I had been moving through day by day, turned out to be a version of it. One that held together as long as both people participated in the same narrative. Once that broke, everything underneath it became visible. Not dramatically, just clearly. I moved out before the final documents were signed. Not in a rush. Not to make a statement. It was just practical. The house didn't hold anything for me anymore. Not in a way that mattered. I took what was mine. Clothes. Tools. A few personal items that had weight beyond their use. Everything else stayed. Or got processed through the agreement. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was neutral. No tension. No unresolved questions looping in the background. Just space. For a while, I kept the same routine. Work. Meals. Sleep. But without the second layer. No need to check patterns. No reason to track behavior or interpret tone. Everything was direct again. What I saw matched what was there. That alone changed the pace of things. People assume the hardest part is the discovery. It isn't. It's the period before it, when things don't align, but you keep adjusting yourself to make them fit. Once that stops, everything becomes simpler. Not easier, just clearer. I didn't revisit what happened. Didn't go back through the messages or the records once it was done. They served their purpose. After that, they had no function. Same with the conversations that never happened. There was nothing in them I needed anymore. I didn't carry anger forward. Not intentionally. There just wasn't anything left to attach it to. What remained was distance. Clean. Defined. And for the first time in a while, stable. Not because things improved, but because they stopped shifting. And once that happened, it became easier to move forward without looking back. I moved to Phoenix a few months after everything was finalized. Not for a fresh start. I didn't need one of those. It was more about distance, clean separation from anything that carried overlap. New city, new routine, same structure. I kept working. Same industry, different company. Smaller team, less noise. The pace was slower, but it was consistent. That mattered more than anything else. I kept saving, like before. Not aggressively, just steady. Numbers moving in the right direction again, without interruption, without anything pulling from the side. The days felt different. Not better in a dramatic way, just quieter. No second layer of attention running in the background. No need to observe, track, or interpret. What I saw was what was there. That was enough. I didn't stay in touch with her. There was nothing to maintain. No reason to revisit anything that had already been resolved. Whatever she did after that wasn't part of my structure anymore. Sometimes I think about that moment in the living room. Not often. Just enough to recognize what it was. Not the beginning of the end. Just the first clear signal that things were already in motion. And now, looking back, I understand something I didn't before. Silence isn't absence. It's position. And sometimes, It says more than anything else ever could. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.